Hello, Kiss Army. Thank you for watching. This is episode 6 of the Kiss Army Things podcast. My name is Xander.
My name is Jeb. In today's episode, we're going to be going over the A&E Documentary, which aired, how long ago was that? 2 or 3 weeks ago? I forget.
For these folks, probably upwards of a month, maybe now.
Oh, that's true.
It's been a minute, but we haven't had a chance on this podcast to actually discuss it. But yeah, it'd be nice to give a few thoughts about it.
Yeah, we're going to give a brief overview of the documentary, why it was important, did we like it, did we not like it, what would we have changed, if anything, and then, which will probably be the more interesting topic, is the future of the band, the future of Kiss. What do Kiss fans have to look forward to beyond the end of the road tour, the possibilities of what they're going to do, the Kiss cruises, maybe Kiss 2.0. We're going to discuss all the possibilities, and I think you said you had some kind of information that was circulating around the Kiss community that I have not heard, and so a good bit of news as well. So what was your initial impression of the documentary, or what did you think about it beforehand watching it? What were your expectations?
Well, I was really excited just because obviously anytime you get to see a documentary on Kiss or anything about Kiss on TV, it's always exciting. So I try not to overthink it because I know most Kiss fans, we get really like, as soon as they say they're going to do this big release, we get our, we get our glasses on, and we
glasses on, our
3D we start going to our podcast, right? And our first episode was discussing, the A&E documentary off the soundboard and all that stuff. So we were, just like anybody else, ready to discuss it as quick as possible. And of course now it's been a minute, but I tried to just be happy. And just, because Kiss makes me happy, and so I want to be happy.
You want to keep it uncomplicated, no drama necessarily.
There's so many different ways, and even when I was watching it, I was like, nope, don't, I would have done that differently, or, right. They didn't mention this, they should have done, and there's a million different things to poke out and do, but, I really wanted to just sit back and be enthralled by Kiss.
Yeah.
I wanted to be impressed and entertained by Kiss. I think that all diehards knew going into this that we weren't going to just learn something completely new and shocking about the band. I mean, we've all heard the story. There's plenty of books, there's plenty of other documentaries, there's plenty of fans with plenty of stories that, we already know the story. So I wasn't looking to learn some new hidden chapter.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just hear that story again because it's a good story, and a good story is a good story. So the thing that I think I was looking forward to the most was some of the visual stuff, like the unreleased footage.
Oh yeah,
there was some cool stuff of them. I wish I could see the whole thing more, and talk about it really, really, really in depth. But from what we've seen, I loved the unreleased footage when they were for instance, in the 70s, they were on the plane, and it had footage of Paul and Peter or something like that without makeup on, and they were just talking and goofing off.
Yes.
In today's time, that's so easy to do because everybody has cameras, everybody has phones.
It'd be impossible to do that today.
I just mean recording something of a member of a band. Like anybody can record any artist today on a plane and have it and post it, but back in those days, not everybody had cameras, not everybody had cell phones. Obviously, cell phones didn't exist, but getting that footage would already be hard enough. And the fact that footage exists of Kiss in an era where they were wearing makeup.
Yes.
And, all that stuff is just really, really cool to see. There was all kinds of photos.
Yeah, I loved a lot of the photos, and since brought up some of that footage that we've never seen before, I'm just wondering how much more they have that we'll never get to see. Because if they have stuff like that, I'm sure they got a ton of other things that will... I wish we could just get some kind of collection of, some sort of a release of nothing but that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That would be, that obviously every Kiss fan would be on board. But now that we know it's out there, I think, they could really do something cool with that.
I think some of that stuff was recruited by fans. They sent out a call to fans saying, hey, send us in all this unreleased material. Send in all your rare stuff.
Yeah.
And we're going to put it. So, I don't know how much of it was part of that. But I would imagine, there a lot of stuff exists that we don't know exists, and so to see that stuff always come out, even though we've heard the story, to see more added to that story.
I look at it as a chance for all the Kiss fans, the people who are already fans, just to sit back and, as you said, just to sit back and enjoy the rich history of Kiss, and just and like you said, there are a couple things which we might have to mention about whether or not there was some drama or this or that. But I think it was a good opportunity for us to just sit back and think, yes, this is our band. This is what they've accomplished. It felt really good to see something new, like that come out, and to have it to where non-Kiss fans can see it. They're getting in front of the mainstream public, and people who may have had just a vague interest, can really learn more about it and maybe get more interested in it. And I think that's why it was cool.
Another aspect of it I thought was also really cool was, or just that I really appreciated, was how honest it was, and how almost sobering it was, because I feel like if, Kiss fans like us, if we were to do this documentary or something, we would look at it from, they're the greatest band in the world, they conquered and they did all this, and they leveled every stadium.
Yeah.
But from Gene and Paul's, perspective, it was like, look, this has not been easy.
Yeah.
This has not always been fun. This has been a labor of love. This has been, a lot of time and a lot of years, a lot of hard work, a lot of hard times, and yeah, for sure. No pun intended for the song on Dynasty, but I appreciated how Paul and Gene approached it, in the sense that they were okay with talking about the ugly times.
Yeah.
They didn't just make it seem like we were the greatest band ever. We sold tons of records. We changed the industry. Yeah. We did different things that no bands did. We conquered everything. And then, here we are going out on top. They said, look, the whole entire time it's been an uphill battle. Whether it's internally or externally, this has always been an uphill battle.
Right. And I think we mentioned this because we watched it together the first time. Somewhat of a surprising amount of negativity that was in it, and that's not necessarily negative, because as you said, they were being as honest. They were just telling the story of what happened. But I found a lot of it after the 70s, well, actually after the later part of the 70s, it seemed like a lot of it was really negative.
It was all
which
negative.
Was strange. But if you look at it compared to their previous success, it somewhat was, they just weren't that band. And another part of it is, and I think most Kiss fans agree, that they skipped over a lot of the stuff that we would have, the diehards would have been more interested in seeing, like stuff from the 80s and the 90s that we just didn't really get to focus on. But it makes sense, considering they only had, minus commercials, that would have been less than 4 hours of footage.
Right. And
they have to focus on, the part that everyone knows, and, just the origin story.
Yeah, I think...
And the reunion.
There's no way that they could have done an absolute, definitive, through and through kind of storytelling of it. Because, I thought it was weird that they, for instance, didn't mention Cadillac, Michigan.
Wow.
Which I know it was just a very small thing, but they mentioned how Kiss had this very strong connection with the Midwest.
There was footage.
Here we are in Indiana, and so they did show, they did talk about Bill Starkey.
Yes.
They mentioned Starkey creating the Kiss Army, and they talked about Kiss,
in Indiana.
Kiss's rich history in the Midwest. Yeah. But then you have a place like Michigan, which, there was a really cool story there. And again, it doesn't change anything about Kiss's career. Yeah. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The fact that it was omitted doesn't change or ruin their history.
Yeah.
But that's just one of the many few moments and things that could have been mentioned that didn't. Now, however, I will say that the thing that I got out of the most and appreciated the most was the very, very early beginnings of Kiss. I really, really enjoyed hearing, I think there was a part about Gene specifically, but Gene and Paul were talking about how they literally created Kiss from their imagination, and they created it out of nothing and out of nowhere. And so when you think about a couple of young, even younger than us at this point, we're in our mid-20s. Kiss would have been a little younger than us, probably, when they first started. And to be that young and to be four guys, doing something crazy and something cool, something whether it's on the weekends or just after work, because they had their jobs back then, but to think about them creating Kiss out of scratch, out of nothing. They said designing their own logos, their own T-shirts, and Kiss fans who do their own Kiss podcasts. We do our own Kiss. We have our own Kiss stuff in our own. And Kiss people. I'm wearing a Kiss Army Nation podcast T-shirt right now, hosted by Pasquale Vari. He does a bunch of Kiss events in Canada, and everybody gets crazy with it. And so to think about them creating it as it was for the first time in the moment was really, really cool.
I love the way they worded it, described it. It really painted a really cool picture in your head that was, still sounded realistic, but they made it sound awesome and being
Yeah.
sort of grandiose like that. And it's Gene and Paul have their own way with words, and they love doing it. But I've never heard them describe it quite like that. Like just create, really making it appealing to people.
I've always loved their creativity, even like with things like LA Kiss, which I know that most fans are like, oh, LA Kiss. But when they did LA Kiss, Paul was like, I'm gonna do their jerseys, I'm gonna do the helmet. Gene's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have the field, and we're gonna bring rock and roll to football.
Oh, they're visionaries.
Like, the way they approach stuff
Yeah.
is just, it's fun. It's great to watch, and they have all the money, of course, now. Yeah. But back then, like just from scratch, from the bottom up, that to me is exciting.
Yes.
Them just being a band, getting the band together, putting on makeup. Paul even said, I can't really tell you how we started putting the makeup on because it just happened.
You know what? I've heard them say that same thing before, like a few different times.
I know, once in the Kiss Extreme.
And I still don't understand what that means, because that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it does and it doesn't. Like did none of them talk about it beforehand? And I mean,
well, it's
always been a strange way to word that occurrence. Like, no one, like, as if they don't even know whose idea it was, because apparently it was no one's idea. They just started doing it, which it's weird to me that it's weird for me to picture what that even looks like.
From what I gathered from the documentary, it looked like before going full on face makeup, full on we're characters now, we're of another world.
Yeah.
It seemed like they were really trying to ride the coattails of, say, the New York Dolls, and they were going with makeup, but a different kind of makeup.
Yeah,
and it was almost like they put stuff on their eyes and their mouth, and then it just leaks out. Well, forget that. Let's cover our whole faces so that nobody knows who we are.
It was like a slow progression.
It really, it does seem like a natural sort of like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One day it's this, the next day it's that, and the next day it's this, and then finally, boom. Okay, stop. This is it. This is it. Yeah. So I loved hearing about that rich history. I loved hearing they mentioned Sean Delaney and how important he was as far as like helping them out with like their choreography, really being like another set of eyes, if you will, because they're on stage, they can't see what they look like. So having Sean like setting up cameras and doing all that, I loved hearing about that because again, it's about I wish I could explain it. It's about the early days where everything is new and fun, and we're just having fun creating something. Like Sean being there doing that. Well, you got people like Neil.
I think some people would say that Sean didn't get nearly enough time. I know people are.
Well, nobody and nothing can get all the time.
But I mean, it seems like they really harped on Bill O'Coin throughout the first whole half of it. And I personally feel like maybe they could have mentioned more about Sean, but I do understand they have a strict time thing. I just
yeah, I mean, I was gonna say like
they did mention him, and that
they mentioned what they needed.
Have to be good.
They mentioned what they needed to, which was his they mentioned the fact that his choreography is they still use that same his they still use that to this day. So I mean,
I think they said just enough to where
I was like you can't give everybody their due it. And there's so many names that are involved.
Yeah.
In the Kiss world that you just can't mention everybody, but the fact that they did mention how important that was, and yes, people like Bill and Neil, who to us it's almost like characters in a story. I mean, we weren't alive back then, and yes, we've read the books, yes, we've heard the stories, but we've met the guys in Kiss, some of them, but we've never met people like Bill and Neil. We don't know who they are, so it's almost like they're characters in a novel.
I feel like we forget about them.
You almost forget about them. And I'm not saying that. We're just being honest because again, like you look at Kiss and it seems like four guys, or
Gene and Paul, or just
Gene and Paul, or like this set of four guys or this set of four guys.
Yeah.
And you have people like Bill and Neil who did a really an amazing job of sticking their nose or necks out and really taking a risk for them.
Without them, who's to say?
Because because Gene and Paul can have all that creativity, they can have all that stuff, all they want. But if you don't have the money and you don't have somebody backing you and supporting you, like I don't know. I'm not in the music industry, so I don't know enough about it. But it seems like the job of a record label is to take care of that artist. And I feel like you start a band, you put out your first album, it doesn't do well. You think it's going to be this amazing, revolutionary thing, and then you go back into the studio, try and do it again, and it doesn't work. And then you do it again for a third time, and it doesn't work. You're starting to be like,
Unless you got a hit.
Unless you have a hit, you have nothing. And they didn't have anything. I mean, they had singles, I guess. They had the live show.
Television appearances.
They had television appearances. They had a great turnout as far as crowds. Word of mouth was great, but there wasn't anything like solidified as far as like
album sale numbers
to show for. There wasn't anything to show for it.
Yeah.
And so to have people like Bill and Neil who are willing to risk their label going under or risk going into debt for a band like Kiss, it's just as Kiss fans after the fact. Thank you to those guys for doing that, and thank you to Gene and Paul for giving the respect where it's due, because had it not been for those guys, because I mean they can be as innovative and creative as they want. But they were not the business people that they were back then. They did not have the money that they do now,
and the resources.
Those people are crucial.
Oh yeah,
and I'm sure there are plenty of other folks, secretaries and designers. I know that Dennis Wallach, who's a graphic designer who did all their album covers, for a long time. You can't mention everybody's name, but there's so many folks that have had a hand in this that it was just really nice to have that kind of perspective.
Yeah. Well, what did you think about Peter, Chris, and Ace really not making any appearances? And I'm wondering, because I'm not really involved in the Kiss online community, not like I used to. Have you seen any sort of backlash come back against the documentary or even Gene and Paul? Or because I know people in the past have, some people side with Gene and Paul, some people don't care, some people are solely in Ace and Peter's corner and will defend them to the death. Was there any sort of drama at all that you saw come back from them not being there and the way Gene and Paul spoke about them in the documentary?
Okay, well, I certainly don't speak for everybody on the internet, so I'll just go by what I know and what I've seen, because I'm sure if you have a different opinion, then that's fine. That's perfectly fine. What he means is that he is not as active on social media, which good for you, bro. He's living a good life. Meanwhile, I'm pulling my hair out now. So from what I could see, because I am involved in a few Kiss groups and ever since the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I've started pulling out of Kiss groups because of conversations like that.
That was a moment that created a huge rift. That was
the biggest rift since 2001 when Eric Singer took over. Yeah, so whenever the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame happened and all these people were saying this and that, I kind of started removing myself because I wanted to be involved in all these groups and hey, I want to meet all these fans and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, well now it's really toxic, so now I'm going to back out and I'm going to find other groups, and then at this point we're starting our own thing here with the Kiss Remember Things podcast. So from what I can tell from the very few groups that I am involved in beforehand, people were really sort of looking at Gene and Paul and saying this, kind of giving Gene and Paul a little bit of crap here and there, saying that, it's just going to be a one-sided story. You're going to say all this and that about Peter and Ace, and they're not going to get their say, and it's going to be, the same thing we've always heard. And so, there was a little bit of that, which I mostly just ignored.
Oh, absolutely.
After the fact, people felt like Gene and Paul were pretty classy and pretty respectful.
Oh, that's surprising.
They were really upset that Peter and Ace did not participate.
Of course.
So it seemed that beforehand fans were a little bit angry at how Gene and Paul were going to approach it, and at the end of it, they were a little upset that Peter and Ace didn't get to have that involvement.
Well, they did get to have that.
They were unhappy that Peter and Ace declined to involve.
Yes.
They wish that they would have been, even if they would have said the same things as those interviews that were pulled, they still would have liked to have seen the four guys do something together.
They probably wouldn't have used those old interviews if they would have.
They probably wouldn't have had to.
I don't think they would have.
But I don't think it matters because I don't know how much of the narrative would have changed. I think they pulled interviews from different places, and even though sometimes Peter and Ace's memories and things can be cloudy, I mean, their opinions, all four members have told the same consistent story over the last however many years, and that is we don't get along.
Yeah.
Like you can call it mudslinging and all this and that, but facts are facts.
But they weren't ever
Stories
friends.
don't change because they happen once, and then you retell them the same over and over. They don't get along. And
so they weren't friends. The four of them were not friends.
No, Gene and Paul in the beginning were barely friends. They were mostly on the same page, had the same vision, became friends, became brothers, met Peter and Ace, who were strangers to them. They were, together, like strangers to each other, and they became the band, and then, it fell apart. They were not brothers, and they were not the best of friends, and that clearly shows. I don't... I was not really impressed with some of the words that I heard from Peter and Ace. in those interviews because it seemed like
I think. Well, go ahead and just finish that.
I was going to say, to finish my thought real quickly. Some of the things that Peter and Ace were saying in those interviews seemed like they were complaining about being in the band again. They were complaining like I don't want to be in a band and record. I don't want to be in a band and go on tours. I don't want to be in a band and rehearse. I don't want to be in a band and go to meetings. They didn't want to be in the band.
That's a good point.
And going back to the honesty thing, Gene and Paul honestly said when we recorded Psycho Circus, we asked them to not show up. We'll pay you, and they said, "Great, fine, that's great. We'll get paid and we'll not show up." And that right there sums up the entire.
The magic was not there.
That sums up the original lineup as far as I'm concerned, because clearly Peter and Ace did not want to be there.
Right. Well, they all. I mean, I was going to say
or maybe they didn't want to be there.
They did it for the money, but Gene and Paul also wanted to do it for the money. All four of them were all in it for reasons that weren't good to start with.
Not lasting reasons. Yeah.
Not lasting reasons.
Those reasons aren't going to last forever.
But and bringing up the things that they said in old interviews, I think, and this is the reason why Peter and Ace. I think it was a mistake for them not to be a part of this, because they could have, not given them the opportunity to use, those old interviews, because they'll say, well, we'll tell the story now. And maybe how they feel about it now, what I'm trying to say is Peter and Ace could have at least defended themselves in some way. So if anyone says, it's a one-sided story, Gene and Paul is just, doing the mudslinging and all this and that, Peter and Ace did have the opportunity to clear the air.
It said they would have declined.
They could have at least said, in real time, in the current age, this, they're going to say this, I disagree with that, here's my side of the story, come to your own conclusion. But the reason why we get a one-sided story is because Peter and Ace have nothing to say.
They shoot themselves in the foot.
It's almost, and you could look at it as if, well, they already... we don't need to be a part of it because they already know what we think, and Gene and Paul will take care of it.
Right.
And maybe they've just given up and said, well, Gene and Paul are, they've been right this whole time. I wish they could have at least, told their side of the story, because I'd be interested in hearing, whether it's bullshit or not, what Peter has to say about this or something else.
Yeah.
I think to get all four of the originals' honest opinions and how they feel it would have been better, but they declined.
I definitely don't want it to seem to anybody out there like we're dogging on the original lineup either, because I know even in the last episode 5, I was talking about, I didn't like the reunion era shows because they didn't sound as great. And,
there's a good reason behind that.
Well, and I don't want anybody to think that we somehow have it in for the originals and we're only focused on one lineup versus the other, because that's not the case. But we are going off of history.
Yeah.
And so, but what I did like was that they pulled enough interviews to make it seem like Peter and Ace were still involved as much as Gene and Paul. Like, I felt like of the interviews that they pulled, Peter and Ace had enough to say as much as Gene and Paul did, even if it wasn't them in 2021 on camera for A&E. Yeah. They pulled from, I think, some Eddie Trunk interviews and different things from the past, different sources. And there was even some fan footage. I remember like Gene Simmons or somebody's birthday bash, there was some footage from Ace. So there was a lot of different material pulled, but I felt like it was enough to at least give Peter and Ace their time to say, even though they didn't do it today, they still had time to say what they said in the past.
Yeah.
And they did give, like, whenever Peter and Ace's voices popped up, they said KISS co-founder.
Yeah.
Gene Simmons, KISS co-founder. The four of them were called co-founders.
Right.
So I felt like giving them, co-founder, and then saying, Peter and Ace declined to be a part of it. They don't endorse. They did. Yeah, they did everything they could. Yeah. They did A&E, Gene and Paul, whoever. Mm-hmm. One party did everything they could to have it be as balanced as possible. Yeah. And I felt like, there were a lot of parts where it wasn't, all this positivity, all this negativity. For instance, the biggest thing for me was Creatures of the Night. Mm-hmm. For two young fans who, that album ranked, I think episode 3, that ranked in our top 5 favorite KISS albums. Yeah. And so it's like, Creatures of the Night, we're talking about Creatures, and then they show that news piece where it said, Creatures of the Night tour, they're only selling at about 75% capacity. The most recent album is the worst selling of the band's career.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, like the part that like I wanted to hear the most, the stage, the tank, the outfits, all this cool stuff happening.
It still seemed larger than life. It still seemed huge.
Especially to us.
Yes.
From one side, it was from our bias, us looking at the TV screen.
Kiss on the top of the game.
Oh, this is tonight. They're playing Brazil. It's this huge show, and it's like, well, that's not the reality of it. From Gina Paul's perspective, the reality was this thing is tanking. So to have that kind of sober, realistic view was appreciated.
Yeah. So one other thing that, while understandable, as we mentioned earlier, there's some things that they couldn't include that we might have wanted to see. One thing that was really disappointing just for us, me and you, was post-reunion tour, after the Psycho Circus tour, with the current lineup, it just seems like it was non-existent.
Yeah, that was a real...
It's expected to a degree that they would, as we said, focus on the origin story, the original lineup. That's the most well-known, yada, yada, yada. But I wish they would have done more to talk about the current lineup and talk about how, that Kiss is still going and that this is, still a big thing. And
yeah. It was really odd to me that it felt like it ended in 2003. And I was watching the clock the whole time because, they took up most of the first 2 hours, or the entire first 2 hours was just up until 79.
Yeah.
And then it picked up in 79 and then spent the first chunk of that going all the way up to 81.
Yeah.
And then I watched the clock. It was like, all right, and then the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And then, so it was like, we're in like 2001. We've got 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Like, what are you guys going to... And then all they did was showed footage of them rehearsing from this tour, which was great. They had footage of them recording from this tour, rehearsing from this In the Road tour. Yeah. That was cool. That was great.
Yeah, well,
but they failed to talk about
footage from the current tour, like live,
but
they
spent all this time. And again, I understand they cannot fit everything, but you literally missed the 03 was the 30th anniversary.
Yeah,
we're approaching the 50th, so an entire 20 years was just knocked off.
Sonic Boom and Monster weren't mentioned.
And some fans would argue and say, well, they didn't release hardly any albums or do anything. And did they? Didn't they? We just talked about how a lot of that was negativity. Yeah. No, not negative, but they showed you the bad side as much as the good side. They said, look, just because you see us in makeup on stage blowing stuff up doesn't mean that things are all hunky-dory. And they said, this was happening, sales were this was that. And okay, that's great. The band had struggles internally after the second coming of the original lineup, and then they could have had a whole section about finding stability, because with Eric and Tommy, for the first time in history since the original, they found stability. Mm-hmm. Bands were always changing, the band was always changing, members, their style, their this and their that, and finally with Eric and Tommy, you have, no other lineup has lasted as long as this lineup has. Yeah. It was this lineup that changed their minds about recording altogether. After Psycho Circus, they said, we're not doing any more albums, there's no reason to. Yeah. And finally, they found a place we're comfortable enough and stable enough where we think we can record and actually enjoy that experience. Yeah. Not only once, but twice. Yeah, we can record a live album. Yeah. They've been a consistent touring act since Alive 35. They've been... they've been going hard since then, and I feel like they had all this that they could have talked about, and it makes perfect sense that they wouldn't, because all anybody really cares about is the ancient, which is not ancient, but they're going to make it sound like, oh, it's this long time ago, and
it's like a fantasy.
It's a fantasy dramatic thing, and there's nothing dramatic about something you can go on YouTube. Yeah. That happened last year, but at the same time, it's like, if you want to tell a story, tell your story.
Yeah, I think maybe they could have, at the very least, shown some kind of montage of, since they didn't even mention Sonic Boom or Monster, just have the album covers kind of show up on the screen. It
takes 2 seconds.
As they're talking, and then show maybe some footage, from the Rock the Nation tour, or that DVD.
Sure.
Shows
the H1 Rock Honors, we were, anything.
Yeah, the American Bandstand would have been cool.
Yeah.
Following just that, because that's a really obscure performance.
That was an amazing performance.
Yeah, it is awesome. I think they should have wrapped it up in a way that really boosts the current lineup, and almost like they're trying to promote. I think they did a little bit, but they just seemed like it was too quick, it was too brief. They just kind of went, here's all this, cool stuff, and then we're moving right along.
If I had to maybe say it a different way, I guess the approach the way they probably were approaching it was, right after the farewell tour, and when they did mention how Peter was not going to finish, that was going to be Eric's job, and now Eric was wearing the makeup, and how Ace's participation in the band was starting to wane, and how they had to bring Tommy in because Ace didn't show up, and so they mentioned those things, but they didn't mention anything about the fact that in 03 Peter came back and Eric was out.
I did notice
and
that.
And then in 2004 Peter is out. And again, it's more drama, more who's in the band, who's not in the band. Is there going to be a band?
I'm glad they didn't put all of that.
It sounded like they wanted
there.
to just wrap it up and say, okay, after the farewell tour, it didn't work, and so this is now the band, and then boom. So they didn't even want to go into semantics. They did a pretty good job of getting into the details of some of the earlier Kiss stuff. And then the farther they went on, unless it was the original four, which is what most people care about, they really didn't give it that much thought. And so to know that our entire... Because 03 was when we saw Kiss live for the first... So apparently our entire lives as Kiss fans, or the era we've lived through, is basically
the
not
one
worth...
that no one cares about.
Is the one that nobody cares about. And you know what? I'm glad that our podcast exists so that we can talk about how it does matter.
Yeah, I'll see if
it does matter. Because if it wasn't for what happened after that...
Yeah.
We
it's hard to
not
say.
like we are now, but we wouldn't be as big a Kiss fans as we are, and we wouldn't know the stuff that we know. We wouldn't have the experiences that we have. You wouldn't be wearing that T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
And we wouldn't be doing this podcast. And so I really feel like even if it was an extra 5 or 10 more minutes, it takes 5 seconds to show Sonic Boom and Monster and Kiss Rocks Vegas flash across the screen, the hottest show on earth.
Yeah.
They've had new sets of costumes. They've had albums. They have
Dubai. They could have shown something.
They have. I think they might have briefly shown something from Dubai and touched on it. But I felt like the current era and all the millions of fans that they've recruited since then were kind of slighted. Yeah, and again, they're not going to put everything in there, but it just felt like that could have been handled a bit differently, which makes me wonder if maybe at some point we'll get something else, another release where I guess the other argument could be that all that stuff has already been released on, like, all that other stuff in the 70s is mostly unreleased, whereas Kiss Rock the Nation, Kiss Rocks Vegas, the Monster Tour, all that took place in an era where where all 20,000 fans have video footage of that. Versus and again, that's a valid point, but if you're going to do a documentary and you're going to tell a story about your band, your legacy, don't leave off the last 20 years.
Yeah.
That comes across as really odd.
I'd say it was almost 20 years, because 2003 is when it really just ended, and they barely talked about the symphony. They didn't show Peter at all, conveniently, because they had just explained how they kicked him out of the band. I'm kind of glad they didn't put every single lineup change like that, because it did become a bit monotonous. Even, of course, we already knew all that stuff anyway, but I was like, are they gonna, after explaining how the reunion tour didn't end up well, are they gonna show Peter on the symphony and talk about that? But I think they just briefly mentioned it and skipped past it. But
some fans have felt, I have heard talks from different people online commenting and saying that this was not a documentary for the diehards. What do you say about that? As a diehard, do you think this was? We're not 70s fans, but we're in this band for life.
Are we meaning who is this for? As in, who did Gene and Paul envision this to be seen by?
I don't know.
Who are they marketing it to? Because
I can't really give
that.
It's
on A&E. It's gonna be maybe for the mainstream public.
Yep.
As a diehard Kiss fan, I still absolutely loved it.
Yep.
I mean, sure. Well, no. I mean, even yes, we've as you said, we've heard everything almost before. There was like 95% of it I already knew. There were a few things I was like, oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Or
a few minute things.
And
like, okay.
The photographs. The public's not going to know which ones. They haven't seen any of them. I've seen a lot of them, but the photos made it worth it for me as a diehard fan. Just cool photos and different footage from the with them without makeup on the reunion tour and all that cool footage. I mean, all that stuff. Was it for the diehards? Not necessarily, but it should probably appeal to the diehards. Unless I think there's
the diehards are the ones that are going to be the most ones watching it.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're the I think
like
nobody pulling the numbers there.
Nobody who's outside of Kiss is going, oh, I cannot wait to watch the Kiss documentary. They're
gonna
be like, oh, okay, this looks cool, or this might fill my ears and eyes for the next 2 hours.
Or I know a guy who likes Kiss, and
Or yeah,
interesting to
I
watch.
like rock music. Here's a band that could, whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like the diehards. I mean, like, because we were like, oh, we don't have A&E. We got to figure out how to get A&E. We got to.
Yeah.
How are we gonna get
television.
this? Yeah, we had to like subscribe to A&E, pull up a laptop, HDMI to the TV. I mean, we were like,
yeah,
because we're the audience.
Yeah.
So I felt like even though again, there's always things they could have mentioned, they could have said, and could have done differently. Whatever. As a diehard fan, I thought that it was great enough.
Yeah, I'll say. Well, I think
it can't be perfect.
I think it's for the diehards in the way that it's Kiss, and we love Kiss. We love hearing about Kiss. It's not like it's a new Kiss thing. Of course, it's for the diehards too.
Right.
I mean, at the beginning we talked about just sitting back and enjoying, and just enjoying our.
That's
band
what it's all about.
Just enjoying our band being celebrated.
That's what it's all about.
For almost for almost 50 years. It's nice for any. I think it works really well just for the diehard fans and
casual fans, non-fans.
I think that they pulled it off wonderfully, even though personally we would have liked to see something else. But overall, I think they succeeded in what they did. I wish Ace and Peter would have been a part of it, but they didn't, and that's okay. I mean,
it was done well enough to where I can say that if that had been done in that same exact structure and same way for another artist, I could have watched it.
Yeah.
An artist I don't love, listen to, genre who I don't really, dive into that well. I mean, those biographies and those documentaries are meant to be that way.
Yeah.
And so I think that if somebody, who isn't like us and, watched it and thought, wow, that was really neat, I learned something new, or I appreciate Kiss, or I remember listening to Rock and Roll Night in high school, or I remember... this and that, whatever, then that's good. It invoked something in you. It made you think something, feel something, remember something. Yeah. And then, for us at base level, it was like, we're about to watch. It's the same story, but I'll hear the same story again. A good story is a good story. So for us, it was like, I cannot wait to sit here and watch Kiss on TV and hear Gene and Paul talk about their band.
Well, and another small thing before I move on is, I had lower expectations than I thought, because when I started watching it and I started realizing, it's not just going to be them sitting in the studio answering questions. The part where Gene and Paul, towards the beginning, actually physically went to Electric Lady Studios and they picked up 2 acoustic guitars. That to me was amazing.
Oh, when they play Let Me Know.
I did not expect that.
Well,
I didn't expect Gene and Paul to be in the same room or anything like that, because usually when they do these things for television, it's just here's Paul in a studio and it's got a light on him and they're
sitting in a chair
like with a white backdrop. And no, like they actually had Gene and Paul and some of it in the same room together. Paul's sitting on the couch barefoot and Gene's slumped on a chair. That's what I wanted to see, but did not know I wanted to see that.
Okay.
Just them casually. I mean, they did have them.
It felt
Paul.
It felt kind of like it was.
Well, it was a set. They had
a set.
Yeah, but just incorporating them, Gene and Paul getting together. That was really. I thought that was really special and cool to me. Just watching Gene turning around and going, "Oh, that's Stevie Wonder." So that was like, that was awesome.
Remember
the candid stuff is
remember
great.
The part when they were talking about how Paul had surgery on his ear, I think it was his surgery for his ear, and he had, and Gene was like one of the only people who showed up and was like, "Hey, you good? Like, how you doing, bro? You all right?" And then he was like, "Now I know who my friends are."
I had never heard of that story. Unless he put it in his book and I forgot.
He did mention his surgery in the book, but I've only read Face the Music, I think, twice, and that's been a while, so I can't remember that. But I mean, just to hear that, and that was a good moment.
Yeah,
I was like,
a lot of good stories.
At least I mean, they do love each other.
Yeah,
they do love each other.
I mean,
it's not all business all the time, even though Kiss is quite clearly a business. Now, that's what I kind of want to move on to now, because now we're talking about the future of Kiss, where Gene and Paul will not be involved. It'll be handed off to somebody else, whether that's a person or people or an entity or whatever. It's going to happen. And now is a perfect time to talk about it, because when we decided to talk about this for the podcast, one of my first thoughts was, whoa, remember before COVID shut everything down, they had their final date for a concert set in stone. And that final date was July 17th, 2021.
That's unbelievable.
For Kiss fans watching this, that's already happened.
Wow.
So had COVID, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm glad COVID happened, but had COVID not happened, our favorite band's last concert would be in about a week's time.
Wow.
So we would be sitting here going, okay, so in the next week, this is the last Kiss show ever. Wow. They had that final date set in stone. That final date would be now.
Yeah.
I think now with what we know and what's happened, it's going to be towards the end of 2022.
Yeah.
Will be the last Kiss show. But how does that make you feel, knowing that in 7 days' time, 8 days' time, could have quite possibly have been
that's
the
crazy.
last Kiss show ever performed?
It's just I didn't even think about that at all.
No, neither did I until it came to this.
I won't even know how I feel, of course, until it's a week before 2022. That's wild, because I think, as we've mentioned in our personal history video, we mentioned that there's never been a point, well, not just our lives, in any Kiss fan's life, where Kiss wasn't,
Yeah, Kiss
where they
always...
weren't an active touring band. I mean,
Yeah.
So that, I can't even process thinking about it, because I don't want to think about it, and I have no idea what that even looks like.
Yeah, contrary to what most people outside of Kiss think of Kiss as one of those bands that they do a farewell tour and then they come back, and then they do a farewell tour and then they come back and do a farewell tour.
Yeah.
Kiss, and I'm not sure where that started. If it was a stand-up comedian or a radio show talk person, and if it was, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a great joke. It's funny. But outside that context, it has and carries no merit, because Kiss has only had one farewell tour.
Yeah.
They thought that this was going to be the end. I mean, maybe it should have been for that lineup, and then they were able to see light at the end of the tunnel, and they were able to find themselves in stable condition enough to record and tour. Yeah. And that's been the nature of things. And then now they're going out on their own terms, which is very important to Kiss.
Yeah.
Because they weren't going out on their own terms. I mean, they kind of were. It was their decision, but it wasn't the one they wanted. So for them to say, we're going out on our own terms on the end of the road tour, that is great. Mm-hmm. But, most people will think that Kiss is a band that just has all these never-ending string of farewell tours, and they keep, baiting their fans into spending money, and which is totally not true. Mm-hmm. But we are at a point now where we're getting closer and closer to
the actual
knowing that Gene and Paul will not be stepping on stage in those roles performing music for fans.
As we've always known them. And
they have always stepped up on stage and played music and performed for fans, whether it was with makeup, without makeup, with this member, without that makeup, or this, not that member. The biggest show or a stripped-down show, electric or acoustic. It's always, Kiss has always been Kiss. Yeah. And so I'm wondering how quickly after they wrap this up, will we see some sort of big transition?
So you do think that essentially Kiss 2.0 is happening?
Well, that's what I kind of want to talk about, because up until now, what has been your idea of post-Kiss? From what Kiss have said in interviews,
it's hard
what
to
does it
tell,
sound like to you?
It's been kind of a hot minute since I've heard them say anything about Kiss 2.0. It's been like a couple of years, right? Since they've ever since they've publicly said anything about it in an interview and talking about how someone. I feel like it's been a while since I've heard them say, "Oh, someone's got to fill in these shoes" or something.
Yeah, how many times have you heard them say, "We're going to do an American Idol TV show"? To recruit. How many times have you heard that though? Honestly, it's been a few times. For me, it has been.
Like I said, I'm not even that involved in the online stuff, so I heard that through you. I haven't actually heard it.
Okay, for sure.
That. But we can talk about that, whether that's a good. But I mean, is it even relevant to talk about? Because it's almost as if Gene and Paul has, over time, decided, well, maybe we don't want to do that anymore, and we're just not going to talk about it.
I wish I could remember how recently I heard them say that, because I feel like I even heard Doc McGee say.
Or you think as time would go forward, they would sort of maybe push that more? I mean, why aren't we hearing about that at all anymore?
For me, and who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I but a fan? And that's the thing about this podcast, is that we're literal fans. We have no affiliation with the band. We're not speaking on behalf of anybody. Yeah. We're literally just like you. We're fans having conversations in our basements, in our bedrooms, and all that. So we're just kind of, this isn't a basement, but you get what I'm saying. We're just speculating. But from what I have heard and have gathered, it really did seem like for a long time they were proposing the idea that once Gene and Paul stepped down, Gene and Paul would have 4 other, and do some kind of, they said an American Idol style TV show where they audition for the new Kiss. And for a while I thought about that and how weird that was.
Yeah. And,
how relevant that would even be, how viable that would even be. And then I kind of warmed up to it in the sense that if they were to do that, and you were to have a whole season-long television show where Gene and Paul you have people come up to the auditions, you get their highlight reel, their sob story package, and then they perform, and then they're judged, and we've all seen the X Factor, we've all seen The Voice, we've all seen AGT, all that stuff, so we know how it goes. Mm-hmm. But through that, you would be, if they were to do that to try and recast Kiss, you would through that process get to know whoever it was that was chosen. And you would be able to, I'm assuming, vote on all that if it was to be in that same vein. But again, when I think about how viable it would be and how much it would work, I just don't see that happening.
I don't think it would have worked.
Do you think it would work? Even if they didn't do that weird, that seems kind of off or odd. But if they were to have 4 new people,
it would depend.
It would depend on a lot of things.
It would depend on how they market it.
Yes, it would depend on
how. It's so difficult to say because no one's ever done anything like that.
Right.
And what I'm afraid of is people getting to actually say what they've already been saying about Kiss being a cover band. Now they can actually say that once. Once they perfectly.
If they were to do that, it would be Kiss. It would be the officially sanctioned Kiss tribute band.
Yes. Do I think something like that would certainly, there's no way that could tour like they're touring now.
Not with
fill in a 10 to 20,000 seat place. No one no, they would have to become some sort of opening.
Even us would not do that.
No, I couldn't see myself because it took a long time to kind of analyze my thoughts on this and try to not be a hypocrite about it.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion that my attachments lie with Gene and Paul.
Mm-hmm.
That is where the line is drawn. And it took, because I've always, we always say, it doesn't matter who's in the band, it's just always Kiss. But Gene and Paul has always been the 2 consistent ones. And we've actually been talking about everyone else who's in the band. Because to me, it actually does matter who's in the band. And again, my attachments lie with Gene and Paul. So if something like, it's not like they're going to call it Kiss 2.0, or was that something they were actually thinking about calling? Surely it would still just be Kiss.
Yeah.
And then, so it's not like if something like that came around in 2025 or whatever, a couple of years after the end of the road, I don't know. I don't think I could go. I have no idea. It's strange to think about.
You're saying that it depends on the situation, depends on how it's marketed, how they do it.
It's like a Vegas act.
Well, let me give you some scenarios then.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if, let's say, Kiss ends in 2022, and then in 2024, you have Kiss 2.0 opening up or co-headlining for Def Leppard. 20,000 seaters. You're saying that could not work. I agree, by the way. You're saying that that's not going to work because nobody's going to go to see Kiss if it's not Gene and Paul on a large scale like that as a touring act where they pretend like nothing happened.
Another way to look at it is, would Gene and Paul allow Kiss to just become some opening band all of a sudden just because they're not in it? That's not going out with a bang.
Well, let's say it's a co-headliner. Like how would Kiss 2.0 even co-headline with Def Leppard? It wouldn't work.
Gene and Paul, the only time they've settled on that was for the Aerosmith in 2003, and I don't know, but they've never opened for another band like that since the early days. And so I don't see, because think about Kiss, Gene and Paul always talk about going out with a bang. You want to go out on top.
Yes.
Allowing this sanctioned Kiss tribute band to open for another band I would think Gene and Paul would think that doesn't look particularly good.
Right.
And so I think if it's something sort of like a Vegas act, how they do at Jimmy Buffett or some Elvis. I don't want it to be like a parody like that.
No.
But if they did some sort of, certain venues or like a small venue or certain events like expos or conventions, stuff, I think like that would work.
There is a market for it, but you have to be mindful of that because,
there's not
I do
a
agree.
Huge market for it. Kiss is already somewhat niche in 2021, if you think about it. So it's I'm almost thinking Gene and Paul has just sort of let this concept go, or maybe they listened to some of the fans and decided, wow, they're really not wanting this, because a lot of the diehards, I don't see a lot of diehards getting with that.
No, I've heard a lot. I've heard a lot of diehards obviously completely shut it down.
Yeah.
To where they even say you're saying it's possible depending on how you market it.
Yeah.
There's fans that are saying absolutely not, because loyalty also lies with Gene and Paul.
Well, no, I'm saying like if it's a Vegas, some sort of Vegas-like act, everyone goes to Vegas, and
Right.
Kiss, it's just a fun show. It's like I'm talking about people who.
So
are,
like the residency with Kiss Rocks Vegas.
that is yes.
What if it was?
That's different because that attracts more people who.
What if it was a
what
if this whatever it is Kiss 2.0 is like a Vegas residency
Yeah.
that sets up their show and then tourists come in and they see a Kiss show
Yeah, that'd be great.
and then
I think like a. Yeah.
and then that show after say however many months or whatever picks up and moves to another tourist heavy location. And then they set up their show and they do that. So it's almost like a touring residency.
Yes.
And then what if they
small,
they go all around the world and it takes forever because that's that's how it is. But this Kiss 2.0 goes out on tour as a residency, traveling residency, and then playing whatever set list, doing whatever show, and then after so long, it almost resets to where they're now doing this era of Kiss. With this costume and this, so the first time it's like Destroyer because it's like those are the iconic outfits, and then they do the Destroyer thing, and then they come back and do Love Gun, where it's the Love Gun stage, Alive 2.
I never thought about that.
Fans could be like, "Whoa, we're gonna see the Alive 2 show back with Gene and Paul's money with people who looked or who are the same age as Gene and Paul back then, with who can move it like that."
Yeah.
Because Gene and Paul can't do now what they do then, but to see something like that in a different concept for some people could be cool.
Yeah.
I think the most people that would get a kick out of it would be, like people like us, if we were to have kids, or people in our generation who have kids. It must have been a real trip for Dad taking us to go, because we were there on that Kiss Aerosmith tour with Peter and Tommy, and that was really cool because he got to take his kids to see Kiss. I'm sure if you have kids and done that, it's a really cool experience. Well, and so if we could take our kids to see a Kiss show where it's like, this is the music, this is the live show, this is all that energy. Right. I guess what they're trying to say is that it could possibly transcend Gene and Paul. I definitely agree where it's like the market and the realm in which you work in that is going to matter a lot.
Yes. I think, I couldn't be mad at any Kiss 2.0 because I think there should be something there, as you said, to give the Kiss experience at least.
Yeah.
Some kind of traveling thing or some kind of do one location and have it be some kind of event. Like, it's like, I think the Beatles did something like that. It wasn't like a cover band. It wasn't like them playing music, but it was a whole experience. It was a whole live act thing just to keep it alive. I can't remember what that was called. It was really cool though. But if they did something like that, as its own event, but as long as they don't try to market it as anything other than that, I'm afraid they're just gonna try and just replace him and then have this, try and have a smooth transition. Say this is just Kiss now. We're a touring band. We're just as valid. No, I think it should be for the Kiss experience.
I want to know who those people would be too, because we're so attached at this point to Gene, to Paul, to Eric, to Tommy, to Bruce, to Eric. It's like...
Well, it's pop culture at that point. It's just like the Beatles thing. Why would you go to a Beatles musical thing? Well,
right, but we're attached to, Peter, Ace, Gene and Paul, Eric and Tommy, and Bruce, and all these people. So it's like if Kiss was to be, quote-unquote, recast, who would would we be as attached to those four people? And
no.
How would they... and how would they treat it? Because it's almost like... I don't know if you watched Captain America or Winter Soldier and so we saw Endgame. Captain America is moved on. He handed the shield to Sam, the Falcon, and then so in this new TV show, America gives the shield to a new Captain America. They pick a new guy to become Captain America 2.0, where he wears the suit, he has the shield, he gets the moniker,
right? And
then he ends up
just is that now,
and he ends up ruining it. He ends up taking it too far and saying making it more about him as opposed to what he represents, and he becomes very cocky and becomes very arrogant. He makes rat. So it's like if somebody was to become the new Star Child, that person could be.
I think the fans would be quick to shut that down, though.
Oh yeah, no, they would be. But I'm just talking about all the different nuances that would happen with this, because this is you're saying it's never been done before, so there's a lot to talk about here.
And it would be so much simpler to just say don't do anything and just quit like every other band. Just your legacy's there.
Can I switch the whole?
Go ahead.
I'm ready to
drop the bomb.
Flip the script now because. we've been talking about, I feel like Kiss 2.0 has been a topic of conversation for a really long time. We're at that point now where what's going to happen is going to happen. What is it going to be? We don't know. But here's something that just came out recently that's sort of starting to change my mind and about everything. So this was an interview by, the guy's name is Robert Conte. And he is listed as, okay, this was for Vinyl Rider Music. I'll give the source if anyone wants to look it up. But anyway, so Robert Conte, I know there's a lot of names that go around in Kiss, and it's hard to keep track of everybody's name, but this is a guy who he's listed in this article as the official Kiss consultant, or he's a Kiss catalog consultant.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of him. So.
And I think he was actually a guest on the Kiss Army Nation podcast recently.
Cool.
So you could check that out. Some fans out there could, if you don't know who he is or want to know more about him. But he's a huge Kiss fan. I should say that first. He's a huge Kiss fan, but he's also had really cool opportunities to. I think he wrote a Kiss comic in the 90s. He had some help in working on the convention shows a little bit, and then the biggest thing was that he helped assist in remastering and repackaging Kiss's albums. Wow. I believe the remasters was his. That was his work.
Okay, yeah.
That was his work.
Yeah.
So, which for us is of course we can't know everybody's name, but
right.
Like I said earlier, there's plenty of people that have their hand in all this stuff. But he's just one more guy that has, had his hand in all this stuff. And so this was an interview he did recently for Vinyl Rider Music, and he was talking about, he was asked about him being a Kiss fan, both Kiss fan and, Kiss consultant, and about, Kiss members and, where Kiss will go. And this was his direct quote. This is what he said. He said, "Every incarnation of Kiss is unique in its own way, and there are things I appreciate about them all. As long as Gene and Paul remain with the group, I would rather see Kiss continue in some form than stop altogether. However, don't be surprised if someday the brand is sold to some big conglomerate when those two decide to retire. Kiss should outlive those who kept the flame lit, so to speak, just like Mickey Mouse and Batman. Those iconic characters didn't stop after the retirement and or deaths of their creators. For better or for worse, they evolved as necessary in order to remain relevant and interesting. Don't be surprised if the brand is sold to a big conglomerate."
Yeah.
So, I'm going to tack on to that quote, a quote from Paul Stanley that came in June 2021. So again,
when was that interview from that guy?
When was it? I will look. I have everything else but the actual date. So I can just do a real quick look because
sounds fairly recent.
It is. It is very recent. I know it was. I saw it in an article, very recently. So this was June 24th. It says on vinylridermusic.com, June 24th, an interview with Robert V. Conte. And this was where he talked about. You can go look up yourself, but that's where he mentioned talking about Kiss being a big brand that could be sold.
Yeah.
So, in that same month, here comes Paul Stanley. It says, quizzed by Germany's Radio Bob on whether a new iteration of the band could emerge once he and Simmons have retired, Stanley replied, "I think that recasting Kiss or Kiss 2.0 is not what we have ever talked about. Can Kiss continue and evolve without us in it? Well, yeah, because it's already 50% there. In other words, there was a time where people said, well, it can only be the original 4, and then it was, well, it can only be the original 3. Well, things move on and circumstances changed." He added, per blabbermouth, "Could I see Kiss evolving with different personnel? Yeah. As a big fan as I am of what I do, and I think I'm damn good, there's other people around who could pick up the torch and bring something to the philosophy and to the live show and to the music. It would be Kiss, but it wouldn't be Kiss 2.0. Last quote. If it were to happen, yeah, it would be really just a continuation of the philosophy that we've always had, and that is Kiss is bigger than any member." So all of a sudden, Paul says recasting Kiss and Kiss 2.0 is not what we've ever talked about.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I've heard it too. Now, maybe it's just that's what headlines call it, and maybe they themselves have never explicitly said Kiss 2.0. Yeah.
But I feel like it's a pretty big backward step to say that we've never talked about that at all.
But yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty sure.
You read those back to back, and he said, So did he say recasting is not what we ever talked about?
He said, I think that recasting Kiss or Kiss 2.0 is not what we have ever talked about, period.
That's a direct contradiction to the other quote you just read about saying I can pass the torch on to someone else.
Well, okay, so part of what he's saying here lines up with what they've always said, which is, some folks say only the original 4, well, they're 50% wrong. That's in his book, so that checks out. Kiss is bigger than any member. He said that in the documentary Paul did on the Creatures of the Night tour back in the 80s.
Right, so why would he say
that? So that all makes sense. But now he's saying that recasting Kiss and doing Kiss 2.0.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was afraid of.
Everything else seems to be in line. Because even in the 80s, they said that Kiss is bigger than any member.
So what are they going to do then? Does that mean they're going to do it or not? Because I'm confused. I mean, what are they...
Well, okay.
Is he saying that they're going to continue on without him?
Well, we've been talking about Kiss 2.0 being some sort of traveling band or iteration of the band. Mm-hmm. And according to here, talking about whether a new iteration of the band could emerge, he says no. Now, when I hear him talk about people coming in to pick up the torch and continue the philosophy of Kiss,
it's so vague.
With that coupled with Rob's comments about them being sold to some big conglomerate, and the brand continuing on without Gene and Paul, like Mickey Mouse and Batman. Do you see? It sounds like the Demon, the Star Child, the Catman, not Gene Paul, Peter Ace, Gene Paul, Eric Tommy, the Demon, the Star Child, the Catman, the Spaceman will become Donald Duck, Goofy, Mickey Mouse. Not literally, but like that, where we think of them. Because how many people have done the voice of Mickey Mouse in our lifetimes? How many folks have done the voice of Scooby-Doo and Shaggy our whole lives?
Oh yeah.
Millions of folks, or not millions, but lots of folks have done those voices and will do those voices, but the characters seem to stay the same.
Yeah.
How many different versions of Scooby-Doo have there been? A bunch. So it's almost like they're going to take Kiss, and because Gene and Paul aren't there, they're going to extract
the
the meat, if you will, the characters and the names, the look and the image, and
they'll become something else.
Which, I mean,
it already has.
We're already there.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, whereas we thought this whole time they're going to be doing a new band, a glorified Vegas touring act, Kiss 2.0, now it sounds like Kiss will almost just be an idea.
They'll be on T-shirts. They'll be on merchandise. And
Kiss will be...
Which they've already have been.
Kiss will be
I don't know.
Literally bigger than its members. We are attached to Gene and Paul, and have always been attached to Gene and Paul, but it almost sounds like their names in the next 60, 70 years, assuming that this is able to withstand itself, like Batman and Mickey Mouse keep going for all these years, assuming, because, I mean, who was the guy that invented Batman? Is that common knowledge? Maybe it is, and I'm just stupid, but I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Stan Lee did the Marvel characters, but, there were other folks who did that. I mean, it's like, I'm trying to think of a really good example.
I think it was always going to end up
like,
that
take
way.
something popular in life that and then think Photoshop. I use Photoshop all the time, almost every day.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to get myself to memorize this guy's name who invented Photoshop. I feel like if I use Photoshop, I should know who invented it. If I'm a graphic designer, I should know who created Photoshop. And it's almost like that with Kiss, where it's like at a certain point, it's just gonna...
Well, no one cares.
You're not even gonna think. It's almost like with Peter Nace now, or Eric and Tommy now. Like, we know who Peter Nace are. We know the difference between what they look like, their body types, what tours they were on, the quality of camera determines this year, this era. Most people don't know.
Modern society doesn't
and
know.
So as you as you go on, I feel like society's just going to forget. So it's almost like where it's going to be like that to me. Does that sound... Do you see where I'm going with that?
I think that's where it was always going to end up, no matter what. Is Kiss just becoming a brand? I mean, it's already been ingrained in pop culture. And
Thomas and John Knoll made Photoshop. Sorry, that was important to me.
Yeah, but no, like I said, I think it was always going to end up that way, whether they did Kiss 2.0 or not. It was just, I think it was sort of inevitable that Kiss, the logo, those characters would just be a brand. I mean, they're going to be on T-shirts and Target forever.
If the
it's
band
just become like you said, Mickey Mouse. It's all these characters that have lost, a lot of what they were, and it's an icon. It's a brand.
It's a brand.
So I mean, I think Kiss is has already been doing that, but I think But of course, I mean, I'm not sure. Does that mean that they're because it's going to be sold? I guess that mean that I don't know. I'm trying to fit Kiss 2.0.
Once it's sold, it would be hard to see if Gene and Paul being involved at that point.
Well, no, they probably wouldn't be, but I mean,
like
George
Lucas sold Star Wars, and now he doesn't get to say anything. So if Kiss sells the brand, then they don't get to say anything. They could put Kiss on literally anything.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
if Gene and Paul didn't want to do Kiss cigarettes, they could do Kiss cigarettes if they wanted to. They wouldn't, but like, I mean, that's the idea. Where now it's theirs, they can do whatever they want with it. Whoever this entity is, we don't know, but
yeah, I mean,
this is where the future of Kiss is headed. Where it's like it's probably going to be, but no, I can't say that. I can't be too pointed now because even after Kiss is done, we know that like things like Off the Soundboard is going to be a series. Mm-hmm. That's live music. It says Gene Paul. I don't know. Kiss will be just as many things as it is now. A bunch.
Yeah.
It's more than just one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about music, and yet this is, we have all this other stuff with us. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. It's almost hard to talk about the future of Kiss because we're in the middle of it right now. Or we're in the middle of a transition point where for our whole lives it was like, okay, not our whole lives, but certainly after Alive 35, Sonic Boom, it seemed like, okay, we're going to get Kiss now. They're going to be a touring band. They're going to record. When's the next tour? When tickets go on sale?
It was always, when's the next tour?
And so now it's like, well, okay, this is the last tour. So now it's when's the last show? Yeah, it's not when's the next tour. It's, well, when's our last show? And so the future of Kiss, it's definitely going to be, we're in the middle of it now. I mean, with things like the A&E documentary, they're going to do the Netflix biopic.
Maybe,
there's all kinds of things it's definitely signaling the future. The future is here. The future is coming. So even if they do sell Kiss to a conglomerate, whatever that means, and this company, this entity, this no-face entity starts to just do whatever they want with Kiss, it's going to be up to us, the fans, to retell this history because those people aren't going to worry about it. They're going to worry about dollar signs. It's the fans that carry on this legacy.
Well, it always will be. It'll be the expos and stuff like that. That's where Kiss fans, assuming that those will still be going on.
Yeah.
If not official RAND, then fans will start their own expos, and so I think. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, would that really bother you? Because I'm not sure if it would really bother me at all if they ended up just selling. Because I mean. That's just what I imagine them doing anyway. Was saying
selling Kiss. Well,
if they're not going to be touring anymore, then Kiss is already
I have to
brand.
Put myself in their shoes, and if you and I were Gene and Paul, and you and I gave up our entire lives to tour the world over and over, playing the same shows, the same venues for the same people, doing the same interviews, answering the same questions over and over again, I would be comfortable with living out the remainder 20, 30 years of my life, happy, peaceful, without worrying about it. So if they sold Kiss. I mean, think about it. Gene and Paul are two people that for the last 50 years have done whatever they can. That documentary proved that to us.
Yeah.
Doing whatever they can to push this thing forward and keep going. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, they have millions of people resting on their shoulders. Like whenever they do a tour or a show, they know that all of us are quick to rush to the microphones and and go to the cameras and go to social media. And, we put a lot of pressure on that band. And we have put a lot of pressure on them, and we've, and I'm saying we as collectively, you're involved in this too. We're the Kiss Army, but we've always, we've said things and we've put a lot of pressure on them so that, at the end of the day, they have to be okay with letting it go. And so if they do sell it, I'm not going to pick up my pitchfork. I'm not going to burn this or, sell it at the nearest garage sale for 50 cents. And I'm gonna see it from their eyes, and from their eyes, from what I've gathered as a fan, they have put their life, blood, sweat, and tears and passion into this band, and they deserve to, after this tour, retire, step away, live their lives with, Shannon, with Aaron, with the kids, with their families, and be humans. They've been Kiss for 50 years. They've been superheroes. We've put that on them. You have to be the flyer, the flying, blood spitting. I want to see you. We give Paul so much crap because he can't hit the same notes in the 80s as now, and it's like, people, you got to take a break, and then you take a break too. And so I hope that when they do decide to step away, that they live the rest of their lives happy. Yeah. They deserve it. As far as
they
I'm
wouldn't
concerned.
have to sell the brand right after they're done touring. It'll probably be years down the line anyway.
What I learned from that documentary was that Gene and Paul can do whatever they want because only they know.
Yeah.
We can sit here and say, well, the Kiss should do this and they should do that.
Yeah,
but
Kiss
you know
had
what?
20 years ago.
If it was up to us, there might not be a Kiss because we would want to force so many things and do so many things. But it was Gene and Paul's, they had lots of people around them who backed them up and supported them and helped them. But at the end of the day, it was Gene and Paul that, sustained it and allowed it to continue on. Even when the world, the fans, its own members were like, no more.
Yeah.
They wanted to keep going. And so
they've always found a way.
For now, I'm just enjoying, the documentary. I'm enjoying the shows that we've seen on this tour.
Yes. We're thinking about going to see another one.
Hopefully we can see. Hopefully we can see one more.
Yes.
But I would like to know everybody else's thoughts on what they think because obviously Kiss it's your band, it's our band. So you've heard us blab for an hour about what we think about the future of Kiss, but leave some comments on what you guys think. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, so we want to know what you guys think about the future of Kiss, and even what you thought of the documentary. What was your favorite part about the documentary? For me, it was the early stuff. What about you? What was your favorite part?
Yeah, well, just the never before seen footage, and that's pretty much it.
But yeah, I love the early incarnation.
That and Gene and Paul going to the Electric Lady Studios was just, I love that moment. Them getting together and reliving that was awesome.
There was a lot, and I can't wait to go back and hopefully they release it in some way. I want a release of it.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna buy it.
I don't know if they do those documentary biography. I don't know if A&E releases those on DVDs.
I don't know.
There'll be a lot of releases coming out.
It's on Amazon, isn't it? I think it is. Isn't it?
I would like to have a copy of that because it's the new Extreme Close Up. When that came out, we soaked that up because that's at that time that was like
we weren't live when it came out.
Well, right, but
when we saw it, yes.
Yeah, we weren't live when it came out, but when we got that in our hands, that was really cool to us because it was like a definitive sort of not definitive, but like it was an overall like
this
really
is the definitive,
really good telling of the Kiss story from Gene and Paul's perspective and like the struggles and the highs and the lows, and so to have that same thing again all these years later, 20 plus years later,
it's great.
Is great. So
I'll be buying that too if it gets released.
I'll be buying that and buying a ticket to the next show if I can. Until then, thank you guys so much for joining us on this very nice conversation about where Kiss might be going. I can say that I'm interested. I'm interested in seeing, as a fan, I'm interested. I mean, I can sit here and say, don't do this, you should do that, but until it happens, you really can't give, you really can't give a 100% full-on judgment. So definitely leave some comments on what you guys think about the future of Kiss and what you thought of the documentary. I'm enjoying this Moneybag Soda. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Pasquale over at the Kiss Army Nation podcast. I got this really cool shirt over at clicktshop.com. Kiss Army Nation podcast and Kiss Army Things podcast were the two newest in of the many Kiss podcasts that exist. So we got to support one another. So shout out to Pasquale from Kiss Army Canada. Until then, on Kiss Army Things here in Indiana, I'm Xander.
And I'm Jed.
And this has been Kiss Army Things.